So the first motif that we're making today is the sun. And I already have a slip knot ready to go, and I've left a fairly long tail because we're going to be crocheting over that and using that to close up our sun so our center is nice and tight. To begin with, we're going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I like to do is take a small little piece of a different color yarn and lay it over the top of my chains. And then I'm going to join to my first chain using a slip stitch. This is going to create a small ring that we work into. And that small piece of yarn just helps us to find the center of the ring. So for round 2, we begin with a chain 2. 1, 2. Then I'm going to crochet over that long tail that I left, and I'm going to crochet into the center of the ring where my short piece of yarn is. And I'm going to make 12 double crochets. So there's 1, going into the center, pull up a loop, yarn over. Now I'm going to yarn over, go back into the center of the ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. You need to get a little bit more yarn there. And then I'm just going to keep going around until I have 12 double crochets into the center of my ring. All right, I have all 12 double crochets made. I'm going to go ahead and pull out that short little piece of yarn. You can pull it out at any point when your center's pretty clear to you. So to begin, to close this round, I'm going to skip those 2 chains that I made in the beginning, and I'm going to slip stitch into the top of my first double crochet. And now before I move on, I'm going to take that long tail that I crocheted over and pull it. And you may have to give it a little bit of a firm tug. It just depends on. And as you can see, my sun's closed up nice and tight. I don't have a hole in the middle anymore, and I have a nice round circle. And now I'm ready to begin round 3. Round 3 begins with a chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and that counts as a double crochet. And then I'm going to put a regular double crochet into that first stitch where I joined. And then all the way around my circle, I'm going to put 2 double crochets into each stitch. So I'm going into the next stitch now. I'm starting my first double crochet, and then I'll put 1 more into that same stitch. And then I move into the next stitch, and I'm going to do 2 double crochets in that stitch as well. There's 1, and there's 2. And I'm going to keep going around doing 2 double crochets into each stitch. So when I get back to the first double crochet I made, I will have 24 double crochets all together. Okay, so I made all my double crochets, and I counted just to make sure that I had made my full 24. Now I'm going to join to the top of my chain 3. And I'm actually going to join with a single crochet instead of a slip stitch. So there's 1, 2, there's that 3rd chain right there. So I'm going to go in underneath 2 parts of it. I'm going to grab my yarn, pull it through, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through both loops. And that's joining with a single crochet. And I'm going to pause here for a minute and pull out my hook, and I'm going to put a stitch marker into that stitch because when I finish the next round, I want that stitch to be really easy to find, and that stitch marker really helps with that. So now we have finished round 3 and we're ready to start round 4. Round 4 begins in the next stitch. So for now, I'm going to ignore the stitch that I joined to, and I'm going to start in its next door neighbor. And we're going to be making the rays of the sun. And it's going to seem like you're putting a whole lot of stitches into one stitch. If you are, then you're doing it correctly. So into my next stitch, I'm going to start with a double crochet. And you don't chain or anything, you just start with a regular double crochet. And then I'm going to keep working into that same stitch. I'm going to make a treble crochet. So I'm going to wrap around twice, insert my hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And once again, I'm going to pause and pull out my hook, and I'm going to put another stitch marker into the top of that treble crochet, because what we're about to make next is called a picot, and it finishes in the top of that treble crochet, and it can be a little bit hard to find the first couple of times you do it. After you've done it like 3 or 4 and you're like, oh, I know where that is, then you don't have to use that stitch mark anymore. But to begin with, it's really helpful to have that stitch marker there. So I've made my treble crochet, and now I'm ready to make my picot. So all the picot is you chain 2, so 1, 2, and then you're going to make a single crochet into the top of that treble crochet. And this can feel a little bit fiddly or weird when you're first doing it, but once again, after you've done it 3 or 4 times, you really get the hang of it and it doesn't feel so strange. So I'm going to go in through the front of that stitch, and I'm going to grab my yarn and pull it through, and then yarn over and pull through 2. And you can see I have like a little bump there at the top, and that's the tip of your sun ray. So now I'm going to move on. I'm going to keep working into the same stitch I've been working into, and I'm going to make a double crochet, and a half double crochet. So now I've made one whole ray, and I get to move on to a different stitch. So next I'm going to put a single crochet into the stitch that's right next door to the one I just worked into. And then I'm going to do one more single crochet into the next stitch. And now I'm ready to begin my next ray. And it's made the same way that the first one was. All of them are. They're all made exactly the same. So I start with a double crochet, and then in the same stitch, I make a triple crochet, and I forgot to pull out my stitch marker from my first picot. I'm going to grab that. So I've made my triple crochet, and once again I'm going to use my stitch marker to mark the top of it so that is easy to find. You don't even have to close it because it's just going to hang out there for just a little bit. Put my hook back in, and now I'm going to make the picot the same way I did. Chain 1, chain 2, go into the front of that triple crochet, do a single crochet, 1 picot made. And then I'm going to make a double crochet into that same stitch that my other stitches are in, and a half double. And then I'm ready to do a single crochet in my next stitch, and a single crochet in my next stitch, and then I'll start another ray in the next stitch. And you're going to make 8 of these rays in total. The 8th ray ends a little bit differently than the others, so I will demonstrate that in just a few minutes. So I've made my 7 rays of my sun, and I'm ready to make the 8th. The 8th one is made exactly the same way the others were. So I start with a double crochet, and then I make a triple crochet, and then I'm going to do that little picot stitch. I'm not going to bother with the stitch marker because I've done it enough that I pretty much know where the top of that stitch is. I know where I need to go in, what I need to look for. So I'll just put my hook in, do my single crochet, and move on. So now I'm going to make a double, and a half double. So yarn over, pull up a loop, then pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Now this is the only part that is different. Instead of making a single crochet in the next 2 stitches, you make 1 single crochet in the next stitch, and then where you marked that first single crochet join, you're going to slip stitch right there, right where your handy stitch marker is. And that is it. You have made your first sunshine motif. And you can pull your yarn through and make a knot, and then don't forget to weave in your ends. You're going to make 2 of these because you'll need 1 to start your garland and 1 to finish your garland. So now we're ready to make our white cloud. You're going to make 2 white clouds and 2 gray clouds. I already have a slip knot on my hook with a good length of tail just to make sure that I have plenty to tuck in when I'm ready to weave in my ends. So your cloud begins with 8 chains. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you're going to skip this chain that's next to your hook. Remember, the loop on your hook doesn't count as a chain, it's just a loop. But this little stitch next to your hook is a stitch. So we're going to skip that one. We're going to go into the second chain, and we're going to put 3 single crochets into that 1 stitch. Make sure you go under both parts of it, and then single crochet 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And it feels like a lot to put in that 1 little chain, but it all fits. Now I'm going to keep moving. Oh, and you know what? Before I keep moving, I'm going to stop for a moment and put a stitch marker into that first single crochet that I made, because I'm going to want to find that stitch later, and it might be a little bit difficult to find if it doesn't have a stitch marker in it. So now I'm going to continue moving down my chain, and I'm going to single crochet in the next 5 stitches. So that next stitch next to those 3 single crochets can be a little bit tough to find because the stitches get a little stretched out, so make sure you look carefully for that. There's 1, but then after that they get a little bit easier. And there's 2. 3. 4. And 5. I have 1 chain left, and in that last chain I'm going to put 3 single crochets, just like I did in the first chain. So there's 1, and I'm going to start turning this just a little bit because I'm going to be working down the other side of my chain. So I put one just in the top like I normally would, and then I'm gonna put another kind of on the side a little bit there. And then I'm gonna go ahead and turn it so that my stitches that I just made are upside down. And then I'm gonna make my third stitch. So now as you can see, I've turned the chain. This is where I started, and I turned it. So now I'm going to be working down the other side of my stitches. You should have one loop left from when you made your single crochets going across, and you can kind of see it's kind of tight, but there's a little loop there and there and there. And that's the loop that you will be working into to go down the opposite side of your chain. So going down the opposite side, I'm going to single crochet in my next 5 chains, just like I did going across the other way. So there's 1, 2, 3, 'Sometimes you kind of have to encourage that loop to go over your hook. 4, and 5. And we're going to skip that last chain because as you can see there is one little loop left, and we're going to slip stitch to that first single crochet. And I can find it really easy because I put a stitch marker in it. So we'll slip stitch there, and now we have the base for our cloud. Now we're ready to begin round 2. I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to single crochet in the same stitch that I just joined to. And now I'm going to pull that stitch marker out and use it to mark the single crochet that I just made, because I'm going to want to be able to find that stitch easily at the end of the round. And it can be a little bit difficult to find if it's not marked. Okay, now in my very next stitch, I'm going to make 5 double crochets, all in the same stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now in that same stitch, I'm going to make another double crochet. I'm going to continue working in that same stitch and make a third double crochet and a fourth, and a fifth. And that is our first cloud puff. Now in my next stitch, I'm going to make a single crochet, just one this time. And in the next stitch, I'm going to make 5 doubles, just like I did in that first stitch. So 5 doubles, all in the same stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there's our second puff. Now I'm going to skip 1 stitch and single crochet in the next. And then I'm going to skip another stitch and do 5 double crochets in the next. And then I'm going to single crochet in that next stitch. And I'm going to do that same thing again. So 5 double crochets. And you can kind of see I'm starting to work down the other side now. Now I'm going to do 5 double crochets in my next stitch. And then I'm going to skip a stitch and single crochet in the next. And then I'm going to skip a stitch and do 5 double crochets in the next. And then where that stitch marker is, I'm going to slip stitch to that stitch, which is so easy to find because my stitch marker was there. And then I'm going to pull out that stitch marker, and my pretty white fluffy cloud is made. So you'll make one more cloud like this, and then you'll make 2 clouds in gray. And don't forget to weave in your ends. The next motif we're going to make are the raindrops, and you're going to make 3 of these. I've started out, I already have a slip knot on my hook and a loop. The raindrops begin with a chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just like for the sun, I'm going to use a small piece of yarn laid over the top of my stitches before I join to the first chain with the slip stitch. And once again, that's so that the center of our ring is nice and easy to find. Round 1 begins with a double crochet, which is kind of an awkward way to begin a round, but it gives the raindrop a really nice shape. So you're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the center of your ring, right where your yarn is. Grab your yarn, pull it through, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. And I'm going to pause for a moment, pull out my hook, and mark the top of that stitch with a stitch marker because it can be a little bit difficult to find that stitch because it's a little bit shorter and doesn't stand up quite as tall as a normal double crochet would. So it can be a little bit difficult to find the top to join to at the end. So I have my first double crochet made, and now I'm going to make 3 more. This whole raindrop is worked into the middle of this ring. It's kind of fun because it's only really 1 round. You have your foundation chain and then 1 round of stitches, and that's it. So there's 3 double crochets and then a 4th double crochet. I'm going to go ahead and pull out that white yarn. The center of my ring's pretty big now, at least big enough for me to be able to find it, but you leave that yarn in for however long you need it for. So next I'm going to do 2 singles, still working into the center of the ring. 1, 2, and then a treble. This is actually going to be the top of your raindrop. It feels kind of funny because right now it's the bottom, but it becomes the top. And then we finish out with 2 single crochets. And feel free to slide those stitches over so you have room for everything. And now I'm going to join with the slip stitch to the top of that double crochet that's marked with a stitch marker. It can be a little bit awkward to find and get your hook in there just right. There we go. Oh, my yarn split. Let me get the rest of that on there. There we go. And then pull through and pull through. And that's it. Then your raindrop is done. You can cut that tail, make a little knot, weave in your ends, and you can kind of adjust this with your fingers. It ends up kind of folded and fat, so you want to kind of open it out a little bit. You can even give the top a little bit of a pinch to make it a little bit more pointy. Shape it until it looks like a raindrop that you will be proud to show off. And you're going to make 3 of these, and then you're done. Okay, so you have all your motifs made now, and this is the order that you'll string them in on your garland. You'll start with the sun, then you'll move to a white cloud, a gray cloud, your 3 raindrops, then another gray cloud, and a white cloud, and then back to the sun. So we're ready to begin our garland. I have a slip knot on my hook. I left a fairly long tail to make it easier to hang once everything is all strung together. You don't have to. That was just how I decided I wanted to do it. All right, so we're going to begin with just 25 chains. 1, 2. Okay, so I've made my 25 chains and I'm ready to attach my sun. So I'm going to take my sun, I'm going to find the tip of one of the rays, and I want to make sure that the front side of my sun is facing me. And then I'm going to insert my hook into a little stitch at the top. There we go. I'm going to wrap my yarn around my hook. I'm going to pull it through the stitch that I just went into and the loop that was on my hook. Now my sun is attached to my chain, and my chain might twist just a little bit at the point where it attaches, but you want to try to keep that fairly straight. And so now I'm going to chain 5 to get to the next point on my sun. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can chain more or less. It does not have to be 5. Just whatever gets your yarn over to the next point on your sun and that you like the way that it looks. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did. I'm going to find a point at the top of that ray, insert my hook, pull through the stitch, and pull through the yarn on my hook. And now I have my sun attached to my garland. And I'm going to chain 20 between each motif. You can chain more or less. 20 just was a number that looked good to me, but you can certainly use your artistic license and chain more or less, whatever looks good to you. All right, I've chained 20, and now I'm ready to attach my first white cloud. So I'm going to look, and I'm going to find the front of my cloud. I'm going to find the first puff, and I'm going to look for the middle stitch on that puff. So right there. And then I'm going to take my hook, insert it into the top of that stitch, yarn over, pull through. And now I'm going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to find the middle stitch of the next puff, insert my hook, and pull through. And now my white fluffy cloud is attached to my garland. And I'm going to chain 20. 1. And I'm going to attach the gray cloud the same way that I attached the white cloud. Try not to twist your chain too much when you're inserting your hook into your stitch, because that'll help your chain to look nicer, more nice and straight. And then I'm going to insert into the second part of the cloud. And now I'm ready to move on to my raindrops. For the raindrops, I put the raindrops a little bit closer to the gray cloud than I put the other motifs together. So I only chained 10 after my gray cloud. But that part is certainly up to you. If you want to keep the full 20 between the cloud and the raindrops, then that'll look good too. So for the raindrops, I'm going to find the stitch at the tip top, kind of where that point is, insert my hook, and slip stitch through. The raindrops tend to twist a little bit, but that's okay. It just looks like they're blowing in the wind. And then I liked the look of 4 chains between raindrops. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do more or less. Make this your own. Make it look the way that you want it to look. Then I'm going to get my next raindrop, slip stitch through the top. Always make sure that your motifs are facing up when you're slip stitching through them. That'll help show off the best side of everything. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm ready for my third raindrop. I keep it facing me. I insert my hook through that tippy top stitch and pull through. Now I have all my little raindrops in place, and I'm going to chain 10 again to get to my next gray cloud. I said you can do more if you want to do more or less. And now I'm ready to attach my next gray cloud the same way that I attached my first gray cloud. Slip stitch through, chain 5, and slip stitch through the next one. Now I'm going to go back to chaining 20 between motifs, and I'm ready for my white cloud. Slip stitch through the middle of that first puff, chain 5, and slip stitch through the middle of the second puff. Only one more motif to go, getting close to the end. So 20 more chains. And now I'm ready to attach the last sun. I'm going to attach it the way I did the first one. I'm going to find the top of one of the rays, insert my hook, there we go, yarn over and pull through. And then I'm going to chain 5, attach to the second ray, once again at that top point. My hook did not want to stay in that stitch. Let me try again. There we go. That's a better spot. All right, now we're ready for our last chain. We're going to chain 25 more just to finish it off. All right, I have my 25 chains done. So I'm going to go ahead and snip off my yarn. I want to leave a long tail on this end, just like I did on the other end, just to give me something a little bit easier to hang it up with. I'm going to pull that tail through my loop and knot it off. And I am all done. I hope that you find a beautiful place to hang your beautiful garland.